It was supposed to be a simple raid, an easy conquest for the Galactic Empire. Earth was just another insignificant planet in the vastness of space, and humanity, an underdeveloped species, was no match for their advanced technology. But the Empire made one fatal mistake. They picked the wrong species to mess with. As the first missiles rained down on Earth, humanity's response was swift, savage, and something the invaders could never have predicted. What started as a calculated invasion quickly turned into the worst decision the galaxy had ever seen. It was supposed to be a walk in the park, or more accurately, a stroll through the galaxy for the Galactic Empire. Earth was just another tiny speck on their radar, a place with a primitive species that was far behind in technology and politics. The invaders were accustomed to taking planets with ease, sweeping through them like a child swatting at flies. A few bombs, some quick subjugation, and the galaxy would be a little more civilized under their rule. Simple. The Empire's military fleet, a force of sleek, impenetrable ships, dropped out of warp above Earth with the silent precision of a predator. No one on Earth had the faintest idea of what was coming. It was 4 a.m. in most parts of the world, and humanity was in its deep slumber, oblivious to the imminent destruction. But as the first missile launched, the wake-up call wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a nuclear explosion that rattled the ground, obliterating the nearest cities and causing chaos to erupt in seconds. Humans had always been good at ignoring threats until the sky itself became a harbinger of doom. The missiles fell from the sky like a hailstorm, and the Empire's ships were designed for just this, quick strikes and efficient destruction. The humans would be paralyzed by fear and confusion, too disorganized to mount a proper defense. That was the plan. The problem? They didn't know what was sleeping on that little blue and green planet. The first sign that something was wrong came when the invaders' scanners detected an unusual spike in energy. Normally, when an entire civilization is caught off guard, it takes them hours to assemble any sort of meaningful defense. Humans, however, were not your average species. For starters, they had this funny little thing called survival instinct, which when activated, made them far more resourceful than anyone gave them credit for. It wasn't even 5 minutes after the first strike when Earth's military responded. The Empire had just launched a devastating blow to a world they thought was defenseless, only to have their hopes dashed by a single man on a rooftop in Nevada officer calling into command, ordering a counterattack. He didn't have the fancy tech the invaders had, but he did have a thing or two up his sleeve. The man had never seen alien warships before, but he knew how to operate a missile launcher. So, he fired. And then the world followed suit. What happened next was something the Galactic Empire never expected. Humanity fought back. It wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, but it was unrelenting. Earth's war machines, designed for different purposes, suddenly became the most terrifying things the Empire had ever seen. A ragtag group of scientists, mechanics, and soldiers from every corner of the world were working in tandem, improvising and finding ways to turn ordinary objects into deadly weapons. The invaders underestimated the sheer human will to survive. They thought Earth was a quiet, unremarkable planet, a ball of mud and water with no real fight left in it. They hadn't taken into account that humans had been through far worse and still thrived. After all, they had built civilizations on a planet that had constantly tried to kill them: earthquakes, volcanoes, meteors, pandemics, you name it. So a few alien ships didn't exactly terrify them. As the invaders' missiles rained down, humans weren't sitting idly by. They were digging through ancient bunkers, pushing decades-old weapons back into action, and more importantly, turning their rage into invention. Out came the homemade bombs, the guerrilla tactics, the makeshift anti-aircraft systems. Meanwhile, the Empire's fleet was watching in confusion. This wasn't supposed to happen. The humans weren't supposed to fight back. They weren't supposed to do anything except roll over and die. The invaders had miscalculated. By the time they realized the severity of the situation, humanity was already on the offensive. Earth scientists, whose work was often ignored, had come together to craft new weapons that defied the logic of the Empire's technology. Human ingenuity had outpaced the invaders' expectations, and the Empire had learned, far too late, that they were dealing with a species that didn't know how to quit. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, The humans showed them something that made even their advanced fleets hesitate: unity. The entire world, for all its divisions, had put its differences aside and stood united against a common enemy. That's when the Empire realized their colossal error. They had declared war on a species that had mastered the art of persistence. And now the galaxy would watch as Earth's unbreakable will turn their invasion into a cosmic joke. Humanity wasn't just responding to an attack, they were reminding the galaxy of a hard truth: never assume you can break a species that has survived everything. And that, my friends, was the moment the invaders knew they were in for a surprise, one they would never, ever forget. The first wave of missiles had barely left the invaders' ships when Earth's military made its move. Chaos erupted across the planet. But unlike the invaders' expectations, it wasn't a chaotic mess of panic. It was controlled, calculated, and terrifyingly efficient. Humans, for all their faults, had one undeniable trait: when their backs were against the wall, they became a force of nature. And this wasn't the first time they'd been backed into a corner. It didn't take long for the first retaliation to come. The world's emergency alert systems kicked into gear, and governments scrambled to mobilize. In the chaos, a few brave souls in bunkers deep beneath the Earth's surface dusted off military equipment, long abandoned but still functional, the kind of stuff that looked like it belonged in a 1980s action movie. That was just the beginning. Within hours, fighters, bombers, and old-school artillery began rolling out of storage facilities that hadn't seen action since the Cold War. But the true surprise wasn't the weaponry, it was the ingenuity of Earth's people. While the Empire had been busy patting itself on the back for its advanced tech, humans, who had perfected the art of doing more with less, were already repurposing civilian machinery. Tractors became mobile artillery units. Old commercial jets were turned into bombers. They even adapted personal drones for surveillance, turning them into mini weapons platforms. The invaders were initially baffled. What kind of primitive strategy is this? They wondered. The answer was simple: the kind that always worked. As the first blasts rocked cities and left the invaders' ships pockmarked with damage, humanity's true weapon emerged: creativity. Earth's engineers were already hacking into alien technology, what little they had been able to salvage from the wreckage, and modifying it to suit their needs. They didn't need a fleet of shiny warships to take down the Empire's invasion force. They had something more dangerous: human determination. It wasn't long before the invaders realized they had underestimated a species that had been making do with duct tape and cardboard for centuries. Earth's global defense grid was now connected, with satellites in orbit receiving constant data updates. The first signs of real strategy began to emerge. Military leaders, once scrambling to figure out how to combat the invaders, began issuing orders with pinpoint precision, coordinating strikes across continents. On the ground, resistance cells sprung up everywhere. Armed with nothing but the will to survive and whatever tools they could get their hands on, these bands of fighters became the unexpected bane of the Empire's existence. One of the Empire's first mistakes was thinking they could destroy humanity's sense of unity with a few bombs. The more they struck, the more the humans adapted. They figured out the invaders' attack patterns, created countermeasures for their weapons, and adjusted their strategies on the fly. The Galactic Empire had no clue how to handle an enemy that didn't fight like everyone else. Most species, once beaten down, either cowered or surrendered. But not Earth. When humans got punched in the face, they didn't cry, they punched back harder. As Earth's counterattacks began to cripple the Empire's fleet, the invaders' leadership made a fatal miscalculation. They thought Earth's power lay in its weaponry. But they quickly discovered that it was the human mind that made them truly dangerous. They were dealing with a species that was adaptable, creative, and shockingly relentless. The first moments of human resistance had given the invaders a false sense of hope. But now the realization was dawning: they were in trouble. The real surprise came when a few scattered human fleets began organizing. They were barely a fraction of the might of the invaders' military, but they fought with a precision that turned the tables. These were the remnants of Earth's military power pilots who had spent years learning the art of warfare in forgotten training halls, soldiers who had seen the worst of humanity and still rose to the challenge. They didn't have the most advanced ships or the most powerful weapons, but they had something better: the will to fight to the last. The invaders tried to regroup, launching another wave of attacks, but it wasn't just the military that was giving them trouble. Humans from all walks of life had joined the resistance, and they were all contributing in unique ways. Scientists were crafting new weapons out of materials that had been thought useless. Civilians were picking up arms and joining in on the front lines. Engineers were working around the clock to upgrade Earth's defense systems, using everything from the most cutting-edge tech to outdated hardware from the early 21st century. But the invaders? They were getting tired. They had underestimated Earth's capacity to innovate and adapt. Every time they thought they had an advantage, humanity countered with something even more unexpected. It was like fighting an enemy that had no playbook. As the battle continued, the Empire's fleet began to suffer more and more losses. The unrelenting, unpredictable nature of Earth's defense was driving them mad. By now, the Empire was no longer just facing resistance, it was facing a revolution. Humanity wasn't just defending its planet. It was unleashing a war of attrition that no one, not even the Galactic Empire, could win. The invaders had made their first fatal mistake. They thought they were conquering a broken world. Instead, they had awoken the sleeping giant of human creativity. And when humans get creative, it's never pretty for anyone on the other side. The invaders had made one colossal mistake. They had assumed humans were like other species they'd conquered, easy to break, easy to control. What they didn't understand was that Earth wasn't just a planet. It was a battleground of survival, a place where the very environment had forced its inhabitants to adapt and overcome every possible challenge. For centuries, humans had survived plagues, wars, natural disasters, and a host of other catastrophes that would have wiped out lesser species. So when the first missile hit, the humans didn't panic. They adapted. By now, the Empire was starting to realize that they weren't dealing with a primitive species at all. They were dealing with survivors. And the longer this battle raged on, the clearer it became that humanity's strength didn't lie in their technology or their firepower, it was in their ability to improvise. When things went wrong, Earthlings didn't flinch, they fixed it. When they were outgunned, they outwitted. The Empire had underestimated human resourcefulness, and now they were paying the price. The first sign of real trouble for the invaders came when a human scientist, working in a basement lab that looked more like a madman's workshop than anything else, discovered a way to hack into the invaders' communication system. With a little bit of ingenuity and a whole lot of determination, the scientist managed to redirect the invaders' own signals, turning their systems against them. Suddenly, Earth was listening in on the Empire's battle plans, and it was like handing a treasure chest of secrets to a thief. The invaders had never known what hit them. Now, every move they made was anticipated, every attack predicted. Earth's forces began to shift from defense to offense, using the Empire's own tactics to counterattack. Ships that were supposed to be patrolling the far reaches of the galaxy were now forced to protect their own borders from an enemy they could barely comprehend. Every mission they launched seemed to end in disaster. Spacecraft they thought would be invulnerable were being shot down with precision they hadn't expected. The invaders had assumed they would be the ones calling the shots, but now they were playing catch-up. Back on Earth, the situation was beginning to look less like a desperate defense and more like a global counteroffensive. The resistance was becoming more coordinated. Civilian engineers, those who had no formal military training, were creating new weapons and devices faster than the invaders could destroy them. Humanity's ability to adapt wasn't just a survival trait, it was a weapon in and of itself. Every time the Empire launched a devastating strike, humans responded with a vengeance that the invaders simply couldn't match. The truth was, the invaders had no idea how to deal with an enemy that wasn't just fighting back, but constantly getting better at it. Every time they made a move, humanity made two. Every battle they won felt like a Pyrrhic victory, because they had only made the humans angrier and more resourceful. And as Earth's counterattacks began to hit harder, faster, and smarter, the Empire's leadership started to panic. They had never faced an enemy like this one that wouldn't just roll over and die, but one that thrived under pressure. In space, the battles raged, but it was clear who was winning. Human warships, pieced together from salvaged materials, were now taking on the Empire's finest fleets. The invader ships, designed for one thing, overwhelming force, were no match for the cunning and unpredictability of human tactics. The humans were hitting them where it hurt, striking their weak points, exploiting their blind spots. The invaders didn't understand the human approach. It was messy, chaotic, and didn't follow any predictable pattern. But that's exactly what made it so effective. The humans had become like a swarm of bees, small, agile, and relentless. The Empire's tactics, so carefully honed over centuries of conquering other species, were ineffective against the human response. Earth wasn't just a battleground now, it was a war zone where every part of society was involved in the fight. Every factory, every workshop, every home had become a battlefield. Even the food supply was part of the resistance effort. While the Empire's fleets suffered from sabotage, human farmers were contributing to the war effort in ways the invaders hadn't counted on. And yet, the real surprise for the invaders was what they didn't see coming: Earth's civilians. These weren't just soldiers, they were artists, teachers, doctors, engineers, and mothers and fathers who had never picked up a weapon before. But when push came to shove, they didn't hesitate. They joined the fight, and whether it was with a wrench, a rifle, or a homemade bomb, they were doing everything they could to defend their planet. The invaders had no answer for that. You can't defeat an army of people who are willing to do whatever it takes to survive. The Empire's commanders had assumed they were up against a species that would be crushed under the weight of their technology. They were wrong. The more the invaders attacked, the more the humans fought back with a ferocity that shook them to their core. The battle for Earth had become a battle of wills, and humanity's will to survive was unstoppable. The Empire was facing something they couldn't beat: an entire species that refused to give up. And with each passing day, they were learning the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy isn't the biggest ship or the most powerful weapon. It's a species that's been backed into a corner and refuses to go down without a fight. The invaders had underestimated Earth, and they were starting to realize just how big a mistake they'd made. Their fleet, once so confident in its superiority, was now plagued by failures at every turn. The Empire's tactical advantage had been wiped out by one simple, unexpected factor: human adaptability. And the more they tried to retaliate, the more they discovered that Earth's fighting spirit couldn't be crushed, no matter how many missiles they launched or how many cities they bombed. What really threw the invaders off was the sheer unpredictability of humanity's response. Other species they'd conquered were systematic, predictable, easy to conquer once they understood their weaknesses. Earth wasn't like that. Human retaliation didn't follow any battle plan they could memorize. It was a chaotic storm of ingenuity and defiance. No matter what the invaders did, they couldn't quite grasp how to deal with a species that responded to aggression with creativity. At first, the invaders believed they could out-tech Earth. They tried to disable communications, disrupt the human military's movements, and launch devastating strikes on strategic locations. But every time they scored a hit, Earth responded with something even more unexpected. A group of farmers might start launching homemade rockets from their barn. A school of kids might fashion explosive devices in a garage, only to find themselves suddenly facing an alien fleet in their backyard. The Empire's tech was precise, cold, and calculated, but humans were messy, resourceful, and adaptable. And that was what made them so dangerous. It wasn't just the technology that set Earth apart, it was the people. The Empire had expected Earth's leaders to be the only ones organizing any kind of resistance. What they didn't count on was the fact that everyone, from the richest CEOs to the poorest street vendors, had skin in the game. While elite soldiers engaged in high-tech firefights, the average Joe was rigging up a satellite dish to send out a distress signal or pulling an old tractor out of the shed and turning it into an armored vehicle. These weren't soldiers, they were just regular people who had been pushed too far. And when Earth's civilians realized they had the power to fight back, they didn't hold back. As the Empire's forces continued to fail, it became clear that they were fighting an unwinnable war. They were being outsmarted at every turn, their technology now the very thing that worked against them. They didn't understand how Earth's resistance was happening so fast, or how it was growing stronger with every failed strike. No matter how much they tried to squash the rebellion, it seemed like humanity's strength was only multiplied by their frustration. The Empire was chasing ghosts, and every time they thought they had humanity on the ropes, they realized they'd just gotten a little closer to the edge of the cliff. But it wasn't just the clever tricks that were catching the invaders off guard. It was the sheer volume of humanity's response. The moment Earth's military began organizing for a full counteroffensive, their numbers swelled exponentially. Everyone had something to contribute. Factories started mass-producing weaponry at record speed. Engineers who had never designed a bomb in their life were now crafting deadly precision explosives, using whatever they could find. Kids who had once dreamed of being astronauts were now designing anti-aircraft systems out of scrap metal. The Empire's soldiers were overwhelmed by the tide of human resistance, and there was no way to stop it. The longer the war dragged on, the more the Empire began to realize that they were fighting an entire planet, and they had no idea how to defeat such a massive, unified enemy. And the cherry on top? Human persistence. Earth's forces didn't care if they were losing, they were just getting started. Every defeat made them more determined, more creative. And while the Empire's ships were falling to Earth's homemade weaponry, humanity's resilience kept growing stronger. Now the invaders had no choice but to go on the defensive. It wasn't just about fighting back anymore, it was about surviving. For the first time since they'd arrived, they started retreating. And that was when the humans made a mistake. They underestimated just how much Earth loved a good fight. Because once humans smelled blood in the water, they didn't retreat. They didn't rest. They didn't settle. They pressed harder, driving the invaders further and further back until it was impossible for the Empire to hold their ground. The Empire's leaders scrambled for new tactics, but Earth's forces were already 5 steps ahead. As the invaders attempted to regroup, their communications were intercepted again, their plans laid bare for the humans to see. Every time the Empire thought it had a strategy, humans took it and turned it into something far more dangerous. The humans were like a virus, adaptable, unpredictable, and capable of spreading faster than the invaders ever could have imagined. The most amusing part of it all was the moment when the invaders finally figured out that they weren't just losing, they were being outclassed by a species that didn't follow the rules. They had entered this war thinking that their sheer might would win the day, but what they had failed to account for was human ingenuity. And when the Empire tried to launch a final assault, hoping to squash the rebellion once and for all, they walked right into the trap. Earth's people had built a global defense network that not even the mightiest fleet in the galaxy could penetrate. The invaders had just declared war on the wrong species, and now there was no way out. The fight was far from over, but at that moment, Earth's victory was inevitable. The invaders had made their fatal error. They thought Earth's strength came from its weapons. What they didn't realize was that the true weapon had always been humanity itself. The invaders had been bracing for an Earth they could control, a species they could subdue. What they hadn't expected was a species that refused to be beaten no matter the odds. Humanity had transformed the war from a mere fight for survival into a full-fledged campaign of ingenuity, where the line between defense and offense blurred with every passing hour. And now, as the battle for Earth reached a fever pitch, the Empire was getting desperate. They had no idea what they were up against. For the first time in their history, the Empire's leadership was beginning to panic. Their fleet, once the terror of the galaxy, was falling apart piece by piece. Ships designed to conquer entire civilizations were being torn apart by makeshift human weapons. Rockets built from scrap metal, EMP blasts created from old consumer electronics, and an army of civilians wielding weapons that looked more like household tools than military-grade firepower. To make matters worse, human adaptability was starting to make the invaders' precision technology look like a liability. Human engineers had been working around the clock, improving the weapons they'd salvaged and repurposing the technology the Empire had brought with them. With every new piece of alien tech Earth's people got their hands on, they figured out a way to turn it against the invaders. If the Empire thought they could turn the tide with another all-out assault, they were sorely mistaken. The human response was swift, unpredictable, and as relentless as a tidal wave. The first real sign that the Empire was losing control came when Earth's forces started breaking through their lines. Human ships, cobbled together from the wreckage of destroyed invader crafts, were launching surgical strikes on the Empire's most crucial strongholds. The humans didn't have the numbers or the technology to match the Empire's fleet, but they didn't need it. They had learned how to be just as effective with a broken wrench as the invaders were with a top-of-the-line laser cannon. Every attack was a surprise, and every surprise hit harder than the last. Meanwhile, the ground forces were doing their part to keep the Empire on edge. What started as guerrilla tactics had turned into a full-on assault, with resistance fighters taking to the streets in numbers the invaders hadn't anticipated. From every corner of the globe, people who had once never held a weapon were now rising up. What the invaders had thought was a fractured, chaotic world turned out to be a coordinated machine of rage, fueled by a collective desire to protect what was theirs. And then came the moment that the Empire couldn't ignore. A squadron of humans, outfitted with nothing more than repurposed Earth technology, took down one of their flagship carriers. The news spread like wildfire, and within hours, Earth's forces were flooding the Empire's communication networks with reports of victory after victory. What had once been a fractured planet of nations was now a unified force fighting for survival, and the invaders couldn't figure out how to fight back. Every time they thought they had the upper hand, a new human strategy emerged. They had come to Earth expecting to dominate, to crush a broken species into submission. Instead, they had unleashed something that they couldn't put back in the box. The most amusing part was watching the Empire's commanders try to maintain their composure. They had spent centuries studying tactics, building their forces into an unstoppable war machine, and yet here they were, struggling to defend against the one enemy they couldn't understand. The more they tried to assert control, the more the humans adapted. It was like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. No matter how hard they pressed, they couldn't keep up. One of the Empire's highest-ranking generals, a seasoned tactician, finally called for reinforcements. It seemed like the logical move, right? Send in the big guns, the ones who could actually squash this human rebellion. But what the general didn't know was that Earth's engineers had already found a way to track every ship in their fleet, every battle plan, and every tactical move. The moment the reinforcements arrived, they were met with a swarm of humans who knew exactly where they would be. The Empire's forces, once so proud, were being outwitted at every turn. And the worst part? The humans weren't even using their best weapons yet. They were just warming up. The real turning point came when Earth's forces got their hands on a piece of alien technology that the invaders hadn't anticipated. An experimental energy shield. The invaders had thought it was their ace in the hole, a shield that could repel anything. But humans, in their typical fashion, didn't just try to use it. They studied it, they hacked it, and they turned it into the perfect countermeasure for the Empire's next wave of attacks. When the invaders launched another massive assault, they did so with the full belief that they could finally wipe humanity out. But when they encountered the energy shields, their entire strategy collapsed. Every missile, every laser, every bomb they fired bounced harmlessly off the shields. The Empire's fleet, now stranded and vulnerable, found itself under attack by the very forces it had dismissed as weak, primitive, and incapable. The humans didn't just survive this war. They had learned to thrive in it. The more the Empire pushed, the harder humanity pushed back. And as Earth's forces began to take back ground, reclaiming cities one by one, the invaders found themselves facing a very real possibility. They had bitten off more than they could chew. Humanity had gone from being a target to being a nightmare, and there was no end in sight. The Empire's once proud fleets were in disarray, and their forces were scattering across the galaxy, trying to find a way out. Earth's citizens, having finally tasted victory, were not about to let them go so easily. The war was far from over, but one thing was crystal clear. The invaders had declared war on the wrong species, and now they were going to pay the price for it. The tide of the war had shifted, and the invaders were running out of options. For the first time, they were on the defensive, scrambling to salvage a war that had gone sideways. Earth's forces were relentless, outmaneuvering them at every turn. What started as a series of small skirmishes had snowballed into full-scale engagements where the humans held the upper hand. What had the invaders truly expected when they declared war on a species that had survived millennia of natural disasters, global conflicts, and countless near extinctions? They'd underestimated humanity's one most important trait: never giving up. Now the Empire found itself fighting a war of attrition, a war it was losing. For every ship they sent into battle, Earth seemed to send two more, each better equipped and more cleverly designed than the last. Every day, the humans were coming up with new ways to use the invaders' own technology against them. It was as if Earth's entire population had suddenly morphed into one giant think tank of warfare, and the invaders were completely outclassed. The most ironic part of the whole thing? The humans were still using half-baked tech from their own planet. In one particular instance, a group of resistance fighters armed with nothing more than stolen alien blasters took down an entire armored division. The invaders had thought it would be easy to wipe out the humans, but all they had managed to do was give them more fuel for the fire. Every assault was met with an attack that was more brutal, more unexpected, and more effective than the last. The true punchline of this war, though, was how easily Earth had infiltrated the Empire's systems. While the invaders had spent centuries studying every planet they conquered, they had completely failed to understand what made humanity so dangerous. Humans could adapt to anything. Earth wasn't just a battlefield, it was a laboratory, a testing ground where people had learned how to survive in the most extreme conditions imaginable. It was as if every human on the planet had been born with an innate ability to think their way out of any problem. In the upper echelons of the Empire's leadership, whispers of failure were beginning to spread like wildfire. Reports from the front lines spoke of entire battalions that had been ambushed, fleets that had been taken down by human-designed weapons, and even a few instances where entire invasions had been thwarted by civilians armed with nothing but pitchforks and homemade explosives. The invaders had thought Earth was a fluke, a planet full of uncivilized beings who'd never been exposed to true warfare. Instead, they had walked straight into the lair of one of the most resourceful and resilient species the galaxy had ever known. It was becoming painfully clear that the Empire's military strategy was built on the assumption that once they crushed a planet's leadership, the rest of the population would follow. But humans weren't like that. The more the invaders tried to suppress the rebellion, the more they ignited a wildfire that couldn't be put out. People from all walks of life had joined the fight. Former athletes became combat strategists. Former chefs crafted bombs and weapons. Doctors found ways to heal the wounded faster than ever before, even in the chaos of battle. Everyone had a role to play, and the Empire was losing the ability to figure out what would happen next. The entire situation had become a parody of the Empire's expectations. They had launched their first wave of attacks expecting to squash Earth's resistance like an ant under a boot. What they hadn't anticipated was that Earth wasn't a single ant. It was 1,000 ants, working in unison, stinging and biting at every weak spot they could find. The longer the war dragged on, the more the invaders began to realize that they weren't fighting a planet. They were fighting a force of nature, a force they couldn't hope to control. On Earth's side, the victories were becoming more and more outrageous. Military installations that had once been the pride of the invaders were now being reclaimed by Earth's forces. Cities that had been reduced to rubble were slowly being rebuilt, not just with human hands, but with human ingenuity. And every time the invaders tried to strike back, they were met with an answer that left them scrambling. Earth wasn't just winning, it was thriving. In a particularly sweet moment for the humans, Earth's fleet managed to intercept a critical transmission between the Empire's top commanders. The intercepted message was, of course, their last-ditch effort to organize a counteroffensive. The transmission was intercepted not by Earth's military, but by a group of teenage hackers who had been bored on a Sunday afternoon. They had been messing around with some old satellite equipment and stumbled upon the Empire's plans. With a little bit of elbow grease, they turned the tide once again, transmitting the plans to every Earth military network in existence. The invaders' plans were immediately sabotaged, and the Empire's commanders were left wondering how they had been outwitted by a bunch of teenagers with too much time on their hands. The invaders were now fully aware that they weren't just facing an enemy, they were facing a species that had turned desperation into an art form. And as Earth's military tightened its grip, the Empire began to frantically call for reinforcements from across the galaxy. But it was too late. Earth had already begun to take back what was theirs, and as Earth's forces pushed deeper into enemy territory, the invaders realized something no one had warned them about. Humans didn't know how to quit. No matter how many bombs fell, no matter how many fleets were destroyed, the Earth simply kept fighting. And then, the Empire made one last mistake. They underestimated how much Earth loved a good story. They thought they could break humanity's spirit by taking away their homes, their cities, and their technology. But what they didn't realize was that the one thing humans would never surrender was their story. What they stood for, what they fought for. And the moment the Empire crushed one more human city, the last spark of fear evaporated. The humans weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their identity. The war had stretched on longer than anyone had predicted, but the invaders were now facing an undeniable truth. Earth wasn't just surviving, they were winning. The final blow was coming, and it wasn't going to be some grand military maneuver or an epic space battle. No, the humans were going to end it on their terms. The invaders had played all their cards, and they had no idea what was coming. As Earth's forces closed in on the heart of the Empire's command center, the invaders began to panic in a way they had never anticipated. They had expected the humans to break, to crumble under pressure, but instead they had turned into a whirlwind of chaos and determination. Earth had gone from being the underdog to being the nightmare the Empire couldn't escape. Every inch of their retreat was met with a relentless pursuit, as if the humans were everywhere at once. The final confrontation was almost anticlimactic. After all the grand battles, the huge explosions, the desperate counterattacks, the human victory came with a whimper rather than a roar. The invaders, defeated and demoralized, were ready to surrender something they had never done before. The species that had once conquered entire galaxies now found itself begging for mercy. But Earth's response was clear. They had no mercy to give. They had not fought for peace, nor had they fought for forgiveness. They had fought to protect what was theirs. As the invaders' fleet retreated into the dark void of space, the humans didn't celebrate. There were no parades, no cheering crowds. They had won, but in a way that only they understood. The true victory wasn't in the battles fought, it was in the fact that they had refused to give up when the odds were stacked against them. Earth had sent a message to the galaxy. Never underestimate humanity. They were not just a species that had survived wars, famine, and catastrophe. They were a species that could turn the most desperate of situations into the most glorious of triumphs. And in doing so, they had rewritten the rules of war. But even as the last invader ships limped away, something lingered. The Empire's defeat had been comprehensive, but it wasn't just about them. It was about the message sent to every species in the galaxy: if you come for Earth, you come for a fight. And this fight, humans never back down. Not once, not ever. The last transmission from Earth wasn't one of conquest, it was a warning. A simple, unequivocal statement. Congratulations, you just declared war on the wrong species. And then, the message cut off, leaving the invaders with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. For Earth, the war was over. The human race had won, not with overwhelming strength, but with something much more dangerous: resilience. The invaders had underestimated the one thing humans had in abundance: grit. They had thought they could break Earth, but in the end, it was Earth that had broken them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Sci-Fi Horizon Stories for more thrilling tales of science fiction and adventure.